On This Week in Enterprise Tech, the devil went down to Georgia, power over Wi-Fi, and it's back. It's net neutrality. Twice on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twice, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 168, recorded December 4th, 2015. Give the internet gibberish. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Braintree. Even the best mobile app won't work without the right payments API. That's where the Braintree V.0 SDK comes in. One amazingly simple integration gives you every way to pay. Try out the sandbox and see for yourself at braintreepayments.com/enterprise. And by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/Twice. Welcome to Twice, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But of course, I'm not guiding you by myself. I have my good friends, my co-host, my co-workers, starting with Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, how are things in paradise?
Well, things in paradise, I'm hoping, are stable now. We spent this morning moving my lab over from an old Cisco router to a brand new Juniper. And we finally got the IPv6 stable. So I am not sure. Right now, I'm actually not sure whether I'm coming in over IPv4 or IPv6 because I'm running both on my laptop.
Oh, we've definitely got some packet loving going on in Honolulu. Meanwhile, over on the right coast, we've got Mr. Curtis Franklin with Information Week Radio, who's got more than just packet loving. Curtis, how are you, my friend?
Well, other than cold, I'm doing fine. We're suffering the first bit of winter's bitter chill here in northern Florida. So it's a great time to be inside, warmed by the love of Twice.
Indeed. And you know what? I think there's no better way to start off the love of Twice than one with some blips. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. A black cat who goes by the handle of Hacker Bubba, yeah, no, that's not a typo, Hacker Bubba, has made a public dump of sensitive customer data from the United Arab Emirates after the bank refused to pay him a $3 million Bitcoin blackmail. The data dump, which was being released to a Twitter account, contains credit card numbers and past transaction details, authorization codes, and, in some cases, enough personally identifiable information for the hacker to glean phone numbers and email accounts of some customers, which he then used to send taunts to those customers. At the moment, it doesn't seem as if he has a full set of customer data, so it's likely that the bank took the step of keeping separate transaction, account, and personal data. And a twist to the case of ransom is the fact that the hacker offered 5% of his take to a Dubai journalist for quote-unquote cooperation, most likely an attempt to make the breach seem more dangerous than it was in order to cash in on future blackmail attempts.
Swift is now open source. Fulfilling a promise that thrilled Apple developers earlier this year, on Thursday, Apple released the Swift programming language under the open source Apache 2.0 license. Swift is the programming language for future Apple software, and now it has the potential for crafting applications running on Android, Linux, Windows, and other operating systems. The Swift team released versions that run on OS X and Linux systems, and now those with the skills are free to create versions for other platforms. Swift was already accepted by Microsoft, which has touted RimObjects Software's Silver, a compiler that allows Swift code to be run against .NET, Java, Android, and Cocoa APIs. Google has yet to sign on, but overall, it looks like the world of programming is getting just a little more swift.
China claims arrest in the OPM hack that claims it was criminal activity, not state-sponsored. In a meeting on cyber coordination, China's State Councilor of Public Security with U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security and U.S. Attorney General's office, the participants are claiming a positive outcome, which has also revealed that those responsible for the opium hack did come from China, but were not part of government-sponsored activities. Shortly thereafter, the Ars Technica article was updated as China announced arrest in the opium hacking case. So great. This means that I need to get my old federal records from the Chinese criminal overlords and not the Chinese government. Much better.
The devil went down to Georgia looking for some data to steal. Grab your popcorn and diet soda because the soap opera that is Georgia's massive privacy gaffe is getting complicated. In October, the Office of Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp sent CDs to 12 organizations, including political parties, media agencies, and focus groups who pay the state for legally obtainable voter registration information. Unfortunately, in addition to names, the CD also contained 3 additional fields containing the social security numbers, dates of birth, and driver's license numbers of more than 6 million voters across the state. In November, a class action lawsuit was filed against the Secretary of State for the release of that personal information, as well as for the poor response of the state, which didn't warn a single citizen affected by the breach until it was publicly disclosed. 2 weeks later, Secretary of State Kemp announced that he had fired Gary Cooley, who had been a programmer for the state's IT department for 20 years, who he says was responsible for the inclusion of the sensitive information on the CD. And 2 days ago, Gary Cooley gave an interview to AJC claiming that though he had a part in the breach, namely that he had done what was asked of him, he didn't actually have the security access that would have been required to add the records to the public data file that was burned onto CDs. Long story short, if your job has anything dealing with sensitive information, and all IT jobs deal with sensitive information, document everything.
Amazon now offers dedicated hosts in the cloud. Amazon Web Services has added physical servers, which the company dubbed EC2 Dedicated Hosts, to its cloud services list. EC2 Dedicated Hosts are cloud servers that give you the ability to bring legacy software licenses for Windows Server, SQL Server, the Oracle database, and other enterprise software to the cloud. Why does this matter? Dedicated Hosts provides you with visibility into the number of sockets and physical cores that are available so that you can obtain and use software licenses that are a good match for the actual hardware. Amazon likes to call the dedicated host running the customer's licensed software the Bring Your Own License, or BYOL, form of cloud computing.
16 towns and cities in New Jersey are asking the state to investigate how Verizon has abandoned their aging copper landline infrastructure through neglect. The 16 towns in New Jersey have asked the state to investigate Verizon, claiming that the telecommunications company has, through neglect, abandoned and retired its copper landline infrastructure in most of South New Jersey. What the case states is that Verizon has migrated more affluent communities to fiber optics, while much of South New Jersey has been ignored, with more and more traditional copper infrastructure failing due to neglect. Verizon denies that they're doing this and claim they really are meeting the 1993 agreement with the state to provide statewide broadband with either fiber optic or wireless technologies. These communities that are claiming Verizon is ignoring them have stated the failure of Verizon to comply with its obligations to provide fiber optic service throughout the state of New Jersey, combined with poor maintenance of copper landlines, will effectively cripple the capability of customers in rural areas to maintain adequate telephone, data, and internet services, they said.
Hey, Equinix is making a big bet on green. While world leaders gather in Paris to talk about climate change, one Bay Area tech company has just announced its intention to do something about climate change. Redwood City-based Equinix, the world's largest provider of co-location services, is shifting its entire global network of data centers to run on renewable energy. That's quite a feat, considering that the Equinix network consumes 1.21 gigawatts, or actually that's 2,200 gigawatt hours of electricity in 100 data centers spread over 33 countries. The announcement came as Equinix joined more than 140 other companies who have signed on to the American Business Act on Climate Pledge. Of course, pledging is one thing, getting there is another, but Equinix has a plan. They're already purchasing massive amounts of solar and wind energy for their data centers, including 225 megawatt hours of wind energy in Oklahoma and Texas. But their most interesting bet might be in a Sunnyvale-based Bloom Energy company, which manufactures solid oxide fuel cells that can make power from either natural gas or from landfill biogas. 4 Bloom units are already being used at Equinix's SV5 data center in San Jose, and together will produce 8.3 gigawatt hours of power each year. Well, that does it for the Blitz. We'll be jumping straight into the bites in just a bit. But first, we want to thank the first sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now let me ask you something. If you're a developer or if you're an IT folk who needs to support your developers, at some point, you're going to want to get paid, right? I mean, it's nice to create things, but you also want them to be sustainable. Well, the old way to make them sustainable was to contract with a financial services company who can run credit cards for you. Maybe you set up with a colo that owns your equipment because you really want to own your own equipment if it's dealing with financial information. You could do all that, or you could just go with Braintree. Now, Braintree is the easiest way to support multiple mobile payment types. You can accept Apple Pay, PayPal, Bitcoin, Venmo, and all major debit and credit cards with one simple and fast integration. Their V.0 SDK makes it easy to support all those integrations in many languages, all with 10 lines of integrated code. Now, if you're a developer or you're just looking for an easier way to accept the payments, you really do owe it to yourself to check out that V.0 SDK. It supports Android and iOS and JavaScript clients. It's got SDKs in 7 different languages, including .NET, Node.js, Java, Perl, PHP, Python, and Ruby. And with that one simple 10-line snippet of code, you'll be able to accept all the payment types that your customers want, even 130-plus different global currencies. Braintree has the best in-class customer service. If you have a question or a problem with Braintree, you'll always get a live person to talk to. And if you have a problem with the integration, they'll have one of the representatives sit with you to make sure that it goes as planned. Of course, Braintree knows that it's not enough to have easy-to-integrate code and top-notch customer service. They get that because they're offering you that financial service, that their service is the front-facing part of your business. If they lose your customers' financial data, they're not going to blame your payment processor. They're going to blame you. So they take your reputation as their personal goal. They tokenize all their payment information so nothing can ever get lost. No customer data is ever at risk. That's just the way to do it. I also love the fact that they've got a sandbox so you can see what your integration will look like before it actually goes into production. I'm telling you, there's no other provider that you should be looking at except for Braintree. Now, Braintree gives you that easy way to accept multiple payment types with one integration. And integrating it into your app is as simple as inserting a few lines of code. Why not try out Braintree? Try it today. Just go to BraintreePayments.com/enterprise. That's BraintreePayments.com/enterprise and try out their sandbox to see what Braintree can do for you. And we thank Braintree Payments for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Gentlemen, let's jump into the bite. And, well, there's no easy way to say this. We got to go back to net neutrality. Now, it's been 10 months since the passing of net neutrality regulations by the FCC. That's those regulations that forced ISPs to be transparent about their interconnection agreements and refrain from offering packet prioritized services across their networks. Now, today, net neutrality is back in the spotlight, or at least it's back in the courtroom. The FCC's lawyers, as we speak, are defending themselves against in front of a panel of judges in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. Now, what they're defending against is a lawsuit that was brought against them by U.S. Telecom, which is a trade association. It's comprised of AT&T, Verizon, Alamo Broadband, and several other ISPs who are seeking to vacate those rules as it was in 2014 when Verizon sued the FCC, because they are a overreach of authority and would destroy the internet with, and I'm going to quote from their press release, heavy-handed public utility-style regulation designed for 19th century railroads and 1930s telephone monopolies. Now, since this suit was filed, they sort of piled in several other suits that have popped up over the FCC regulations. That includes lawsuits from AT&T, CenturyLink, the American Cable Association, the CTIA, the NCTA, also known as the National Cable and Telecom Association. And, well, it's sort of split its teams. Supporting the FCC is the ACLU, the American Library Association, the Computer and Communications Industry Association, Consumers Union, EFF, Internet Association, Mozilla, Twitter, and former FCC Chairman Reed Hundt. The people who are supporting those who are suing the FCC would include the National Association of Manufacturers, the Telecommunications Industry Association, the Washington Legal Foundation, Competitive Enterprise Institute, and their own former FCC Commissioner, Harold Roth. Now, I do want to mention that many of the detractors, those organizations and associations, were specifically formed to combat the FCC, so we'll just have to keep that in the back of our minds. Chee, I want to throw this over to you first. There are a lot of people who thought that this was done. The FCC regulations passed. They were accepted. They've been in place for 10 months. Nothing really bad has happened to the industry. Why are we seeing these lawsuits now? What do these companies want?
They want to make a lot of more money. You know, I'm getting a really, really big case of deja vu here. You know, I started in the telecom industry back in the days of regulatory, and the whole deal is the telecom providers have been very comfortable making just massive, massive profits on the infrastructure, and they've even been taking money from the federal government to build out new infrastructure. It's kind of like kickstarting the telecom infrastructure. What a deal. So anyway, I was part of a group that worked on deregulating the telecom market in Honolulu, and this is really, really getting familiar. There's a whole bunch of people in the federal side and at the state side that formed organizations just to try and fight this because they don't like change. They like it just the way it is. But to the telecom providers, I tell to you, all the providers, once you deregulated the inter-LATA telco market, suddenly all kinds of new services popped up, and most of those telecom providers are making record profits. I think the same thing could potentially happen. Just loosen up, guys. Net neutrality isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's going to be a balance struck someday. You guys just have to work with the public and work with the supporters to find a middle ground.
Curtis, here's the interesting thing. I'd like to get your take on this. I can actually understand where the ISPs are coming from. That sentence that I quoted, that the FCC is using regulation that was designed for 19th century railroads and 1930 telephone monopolies against them, that's actually true. That they're using Title II, which was in the telecommunications bill that the FCC is using as a foundation for its jurisdiction over ISPs. However, this seems incredibly disingenuous because when the FCC tried to make something that was custom for the new age, for the internet, Verizon sued them and say, you had no standing for this. There's nothing in your charter that would allow you to regulate us. So the FCC had to come back after the court told them, oh, by the way, you still have Title II. They finally came back and said, okay, fine. You tell us we've got Title II. We're going to invoke Title II. So I really don't understand the mentality. I mean, I think Chubert's right. It's all about money. Of course, it's all about money. But where's the legal standing? They're saying, A, you can't make up a new law, and B, the law you're using is too old. I don't see it.
Well, Padre, that's because your background is in engineering, not law.
Yes.
That's your basic problem, because you're trying to apply normal human logic to this, and that's not a good fit. You have to understand that from the telco's point of view, the FCC and all of the state regulatory agencies exist for one purpose, and that is to protect the incumbent telcos from competition. Anything they do that doesn't serve that purpose, it's outside their charter. And so the idea that they would do something that would be of a benefit to consumers is obviously against their charter. The idea that they would do something to foster competition in a way that doesn't involve disadvantaging those who would compete with the incumbent large telcos is not part of their charter. Once you understand that, then everything else makes sense. What the incumbents want is for the government to guarantee them large profits, and to do so by requiring of them minimal investment and minimal competition. Anything that the government does that violates those two areas, the telcos are going to fight using any means at their disposal. And by the way, I would push back. You said that in the 10 months since net neutrality went into place, nothing bad has happened. According to AT&T's CEO, they have all kinds of nifty new products that will be of advantage to every human being on the continent and probably be the savior of mankind in the technology future, but they just can't roll them out because net neutrality makes it too expensive for AT&T. So we're being deprived of all of this future goodness because of the short-sightedness of the FCC. Don't believe me? Just ask AT&T.
Actually, you could just I'm going to jump forward in the story a little bit, then I'm going to jump back as it's set out in the doc. So, Brian, follow us. Curtis, I'm glad you brought that up because I don't want this episode to feel too much like we're just piling on, because you know where we stand. All three of the hosts here on Twiat have come out in favor of net neutrality, and we've also come out in favor of a tempered net neutrality. Chee specifically, as the net neutrality debate was going on, was talking about the bundling, the sweetheart deals, and the fine line between saying this is fair and this is promoting innovation. But I want to specifically talk about the point that Curtis addressed, and that is AT&T saying, no, this is destroying us. This is destroying the internet. We've got a story here from Network World that speaks to that. AT&T's CEO has said, look, since the ruling came out 10 months ago, we've had some killer features. These are the killer features that Curtis talked about that we've been wanting to roll out to the people. But we haven't been able to do it because of the FCC's rules on net neutrality. And Brian, you've got a link down toward the bottom there. Exactly. They're saying, look, they looked at T-Mobile specifically and T-Mobile's new binge on feature. And they're saying, we've been wanting to do that. We've been having weekly meetings with our lawyers and the heads of all our business divisions. But we've been worried about running afoul of the FCC. And therefore, that's proof that the FCC is killing the internet. Now, Chee, to be fair, this is a little confusing to some people because I think some people still don't quite understand what the net neutrality regulations actually did, because they look at what T-Mobile did to create a program that exempted their users from download limits from streaming services from Netflix, HBO, Hulu, Pandora, and others. On the surface, it looks like, wait a minute, that's against net neutrality. And yet FCC Chairman Wheeler came out and said, no, this is what we want to inspire. Why wasn't that a violation of net neutrality?
Because they're going direct connect. We're not dealing with interconnect fees. We're not dealing with interconnect throttling. We're not dealing with interconnect anything. What T-Mobile's doing is they're saying, just run a direct pipe to us. That way you don't have to pay interconnect fees. You don't have to worry about throttling. And because we're not paying interconnect fees, oh, by the way, we can make this free to our customers. FCC Chairman Wheeler, nice.
Curtis, this is actually, we got a lot of hate for this in our chat room from some people, and rightfully so, because we have people who watch the show who are actually working on their own ISPs, and this was very close to them. But they were saying, you don't understand, because Twiat keeps saying it's all about the interconnects. It's not about the interconnects. This is a power grab by the FCC. What we had been saying was all net neutrality really is the use of Title II. I know that's sort of the nuclear option, but the use of Title II to open up the interconnect agreements to the FCC so the FCC can actually say, no, you're doing something wrong there. What I see T-Mobile's deal as being is a bypassing of that, saying this won't do anything with the interconnects. We're not going to deal with the interconnects. We're going to have them install inside of our network. We're not going to charge them anything to do it. We just want to provide better service to our customers. That's a key difference. It seems very minimal, but can you explain why is it important that these services are not being provided through an interconnect to T-Mobile customers?
Well, the easy thing is to say that what the lack of the interconnect does is reduce the economic complexity of what's going on. Because really what is going on, T-Mobile's key to being able to get the FCC to accept this is that they don't have an ownership stake in any of these services. They don't require payment from these services to come inside the interconnection points. And they reap no direct financial benefit from the arrangement. This is, by the way they have structured it, purely a content provider to consumer shortcut. Now, my guess is that if you poke hard at AT&T, what they have been trying to figure out is how to take Dish Network and make it available to their customers. The financial arrangements, the economic arrangements are much different, and that's the real key. Anything that smacks of either pay to play or advantaging your own captive services is going to get knocked down by the FCC. Providing a shortcut from a third-party content provider to your customers, that's the kind of thing that the FCC is going to smile upon and say, look, that's exactly what we were talking about. T-Mobile is being neutral in this transaction. That's what AT&T still can't get their heads around, largely because they are one of the old-time legacy providers. And believe me, the legacy mindset, the whole monopoly mindset, dies very hard.
Actually, when we first brought up the binge on service from T-Mobile, Brian Chee did say he's looking forward to what happens when the first pornography provider wants to get onto the T-Mobile network, because their CEO has said, look, anyone who wants to come in and install a box on the inside of our network is welcome to do it. We've got Brian Blaze 420. Brian, I hope you're not driving right now, in the chat room, who is saying that, well, he wants to know, how is putting the box on the inside of the interconnect not limiting other services? And again, it's a very slim distinction, but this is an important distinction. When Comcast was trying to do the exact same thing, what they were doing is they were saying, well, we're going to provide you with free X, Netflix, Hulu, whatever it's going to be, but it was going to run through the interconnect. By its definition, because it was going to be running through the internet, through the interconnect, that traffic had to be prioritized. In order to prioritize that traffic, it means you have to degrade the traffic of potentially competing services. That's not what's happening here. What T-Mobile is saying is, because it's on the inside of our interconnect, we don't have to prioritize the traffic. We don't have to degrade the traffic of any other customers. If you want to get to any of the services from any other provider on our network, it will still go through the interconnect along with all the rest of the data, none of it being prioritized. That's a key difference. Now, Cheebert, I mean, I hate to bring up this question because it's something that we asked at the very beginning of the net neutrality debate, but do most people care? After this thing went away 10 months ago, I got the feeling that the only ones who were passionate about this were computer geeks, were the Twiat riot, were the Twit audience. I don't know if the average American knows or cares anything about net neutrality.
Yeah, for the most part, I get blank looks. Now, I will say the people that really do care about net neutrality actually aren't so much the computer geeks, though, you know, we're pretty vocal about it. No, it's the broadcasters. Now, while I wasn't able to go to NAB this year, what I did hear over the grapevine is almost every major vendor at NAB was talking about net neutrality, because once net neutrality really starts happening, for them, it opens up an amazing number of new possibilities. So that's going to be interesting. So anyway, yeah, there's net neutrality has been a non-topic for Joe Friday, but for specialized groups like the IT industry, especially carriers, ISPs, and now the broadcasters, those are the people that are going to be pushing this rope uphill.
Right, right. Oh, I do want to back up just a little bit, because there's some people who are probably a bit fuzzy on the whole net neutrality debate. Do remember that all of those entities that we talked about, the ones that are suing the FCC, they are the ones that made 4 basic claims when the net neutrality debate started. And those 4 claims were, 1, net neutrality would make it nearly impossible for ISPs to upgrade their infrastructure, which has been obviously a lie because there's been a record amount of spending on infrastructure since net neutrality has passed. 2, that net neutrality would actually eliminate telco competition, which again, no. We've seen more inter-telco communication in the last half a year than we have in the last decade. 3, that net neutrality would make broadband internet as poorly managed as water, sewer, power. We haven't seen that yet, so we should probably pay attention. And 4, that net neutrality would censor content, which, okay, that's just not happen. Also remember that key in this discussion are two bills, two pieces of law that have to get referenced again and again, and that's the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and the Cable Communications Act of 1984. Those were the two bills that encouraged the rollout of infrastructure. The Cable Communications Bill, by making it a preferable place for cable companies to come in and deploy networks to municipalities. The 1996 Telecommunications Act, which encouraged, with a $200 billion investment of public money, the development of a national infrastructure that would develop 45 megabits per second of bidirectional internet speed to 86 million homes in all 50 states. Now, it should be stated that Cheebert's comment earlier on, that this was sort of a Kickstarter for companies, was dead on. These companies got huge, huge payouts of public money at the start of their network deployment. And I don't think it's unreasonable, Cheebert, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's unreasonable for us to now expect that we get the service that we paid for 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I like getting value for my money.
All right, gentlemen, I don't want to be the dead horse. We are going to have to come back and revisit this. What I'd like to do is I'd like to invite our friends from TWIL to come and speak to us. Maybe they can explain what's happening in the legal proceedings. Unfortunately, even though this is a district court, if the cable and trade unions, associations fail, there are still legal outlets left for them. So this is probably going to stay in the news for years and years and, unfortunately, years. Well, when we come back, we're going to be talking about something that isn't net neutrality. But before we do that, let's go ahead and thank the second sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, let me ask you something. Do you hire, or are you responsible for hiring for a business? Well, if so, then you should know that those people that you hire, the people that you bring in, are going to be the public face of your company. They're the ones who will decide whether you succeed or fail, the one who will bring in innovation, who will bring in fresh ideas. Well, it's so important not to just get someone who has the skill set, but someone who fits your profile, your company, your culture. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you post to as many places as possible so you can get the most amount of candidates as possible. Well, that's why you've got to try ZipRecruiter. Posting jobs in just one place isn't enough to find those quality candidates. So when you use ZipRecruiter, you can post to 100 plus job sites with a single click. And you can be instantly matched to candidates from over 6 million resumes. Now, don't listen to me. Just listen to Scott. He's an actual ZipRecruiter client, and he wrote, the recruiting process used to be so painful. Before I'd post to several places, get 1 million resumes, but only a few responses from qualified candidates. It was torture. But with ZipRecruiter, we post once and get qualified candidates in one easy-to-review place. We've hired some of our best employees using ZipRecruiter. Just post once. And within 24 hours, you can watch your candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. ZipRecruiter has been used by over 400,000 businesses, and you can try it now for free. Getting the right people for your company is so important. Do you really want to leave it up to chance? Here's what we want you to do. If you're responsible for hiring, if you're trying to get the right talent on board, if you're trying to build up your business, try ZipRecruiter and try it for free today. Go to ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Gentlemen, I want to take a step outside the studio for just a bit. Last week, for the Thanksgiving episode, we actually had a chance to speak about encryption, about how important it was to encrypt, or at least to obfuscate the data that you were sending out to the cloud. Well, a few months ago at TechCrunch Disrupt 2015, I had a chance to speak with a company that is taking a novel approach to obfuscation. Hey, Brian, go ahead and push the button. These days, if you're going to be pushing data up into the cloud, you have to worry about the breach. What happens when inevitably the provider that you trust to take care of your data loses control? Well, here at CloudMass, they've got a solution, which is give them gibberish. I'm speaking with Tarek, who's going to explain what their solution does. Tarek, this is not really encryption. This is a transparent layer of data protection.
Correct. So what we provide our users is ability, they can go and use any cloud vendor just like the way they use today. Now, behind the scene, as they're inputting their data into a system, we're swapping their data with something that's totally meaningless. So if I'm using Google or Dropbox, all I see from Google Insider, if I was inspecting even within memory, all I see is data that's useless. It only comes back to its meaningful information when I send it to somebody that I trust, somebody that's actually in my circle of trust, and only then it becomes back to its useful information.
There are a few things I really like about the solution. First, it uses a really, really strong, well, I'm going to call it encryption. You call it substitution, but basically it's unbreakable. There is no algorithm that you can brute force. This substitution is, unless someone has the key, they're not getting in. The second thing is, because you've uploaded gibberish to the cloud provider, and it means nothing except to those that are either you or the people you trust, it means that if that provider does get breached, someone will get data that looks like it's from you, but it is really meaningless. They'll be scratching their heads.
Absolutely. And I think we can't stress enough that just because it's simple to use doesn't mean it's less secure. In fact, it is arguably more secure. So we actually started from a government implementation, and we made it simple enough to scale down even to individual consumers. So now an average user can get the same security and the same strong algorithms that a sophisticated government department is actually able to use.
Tarek, now, if they wanted to find out more about Cloudware, more about what you do, more about your technology, where can they go?
So I think the best place is to visit our website. We do have a free version you can download, and you can use it today with Gmail and Google Apps. So that's the best way to start, and we're always adding functionality and support to any other application. Thank you.
Tarek, thank you very much for speaking with us. And if you really want to protect your data in the cloud age, maybe you need to get some Cloudware. Chee, I kind of understand the Cloudware approach. The reason why they're saying it's not encryption, it's really substitution. So they're using a one-time key. There's no mathematical formula that you could brute force. Unless you have that key, it just isn't working. What do you think this approach is going to take off? Because essentially what they're saying is you can't even trust your cloud providers anymore. I mean, if you have a cloud provider that is using information, at some point that information is going to get breached. Do you see this taking off?
I don't know. You know, I'm sitting here scratching my head going, okay, so what you're doing is if you don't have the correct identity, you're going to get garden hose B with junk in it.
Right.
But if you do have the right key, you get garden hose A with pure water or pure data. Yeah, maybe. You know, it's kind of, you know, when I say instead of just encrypting the really important stuff, you should encrypt, you know, the shopping list and, you know, things like that so that you can't tell the good from the bad. So they're taking that and sidestepping a little bit. Yeah, I guess this might work.
Yeah.
You know, always being there means you can't look for patterns anymore.
This is actually something that Curtis has said many times, going back to the beginning of Twite, which is encrypt, encrypt, encrypt. But this is the same idea, though, Curtis, right? It's if you're always sending gibberish, they'll never be able to interpret your gibberish as anything but gibberish. And what they're saying is, look, you even want the records that you store in your cloud-based, let's say, Salesforce provider to be like gibberish. So if that database gets breached, your data is completely unreadable.
Exactly so. Because, you know, this is what we've talked about in the past, the notion that the basic operating assumption is that you're going to be breached, you know, and the best assumption is that you are in a constant state of someone having breached your security. So the only rational thing to do if you know someone has breached your security is making sure that they cannot use what they find. Hence, lots and lots of gibberish wherever you look.
I think that's going to be our show title. Gibberish. It's what's for dinner. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and move on to the last story of the day. This is one that I've been wanting to run for a while, and we finally have some interesting news about it. The Internet of Things, of course, it's big. We've addressed it several times on the show. We've had guests talking about what it means and the devices that are up and coming and the type of data that it could provide and what we could do with that data. But one of the issues about the Internet of Things is that although the wireless connectivity that we need in order to make this work is now a possibility, the power that you would need to get out to all these ubiquitous IoT sensors just wasn't there. I mean, it might be nice to be able to take data metrics on absolutely everything in daily life, but unless there's an easy way to power the devices, was going to be rather limited as to what you could collect. Well, researchers at the University of Washington now have two concepts that could potentially solve that current weak link in the Internet of Things. They're looking at two things. They're looking over power over Wi-Fi, which is actually something that's been around for a while, but I like their approach. And they're looking at power from delta T and delta P, which is a change in temperature and a change in pressure. Now, power over Wi-Fi, the one that they're working with, doesn't harvest Wi-Fi signals. That's been a focus of some of the past attempts to use this, which is they just take any Wi-Fi RF energy that's in the air and they pull it down and they use it to power the devices, which was a problem because it then meant that you were messing up people's network. What their technology is doing is it's looking for unused channels. It's then broadcasting RF energy over those unused channels, and it's that energy that gets used by the devices. The second approach that they're using, it's actually a very old concept. It's a bellows concept. You look for changes in pressure or changes in temperature. And anytime you get a change in pressure or temperature, you can have material that will expand and contract. And anytime you have material that can expand and contract, you can generate an incredibly small amount of power, but it is still usable power. Now, what makes this possible is that we have seen some Internet of Things devices, especially from Atmel, that are beyond low power. They're extremely low power. In fact, I just had a demonstration that was done for me of an Internet of Things device that determined whether or not people were sitting at a table, and it could be powered by your hands on the table. When you put your hands on the table, that was enough of a change in temperature that it provided extremely low current that could run the IoT device. Chee, let me throw this over to you first, because you do work in a research environment. How exciting is it to think of devices that you don't have to worry about power for because they just take it from the ambient environment?
Dude, it's the way of the world. If I don't have to change batteries, then life just got a lot more interesting. You know, I can put sensors in a lot more places. If I don't have to tie my sensors into a power source, like an AC outlet or something, now all of a sudden I can go and put my sensor where it really and truly makes more sense. There's a lot of interesting things out there. The only thing I caution people on is, while this sounds like a really sexy technology, this is not the first time this has been proposed. It was proposed in a DARPA project many, many, many years ago, and it worked great in the laboratory. But when you start having temperature or pressure extremes, say someplace like Minnesota, things started breaking because you didn't get enough of a temperature change. A lot of these devices only work well right in the center. Once you start getting out to the edges, they start breaking. So, right. Yeah, hold your breath on this one. We got a ways to go, but there's lots and lots of research. In fact, there's a guy just right down the hall that has a chewing gum, like a Wrigley's chewing gum stick of gum size device that you could stick onto, say, an exhaust pipe and generate enough electricity from it to power a GPS tracker, which is really, really cool.
Wow. Okay. That's all kinds of dangerous.
The problem is it's $1,000 a stick. Right. Not going to work yet. So we're getting there, just not yet.
Yeah. Well taken your point about the extremes, because you've got to remember, it's easy to think of this energy as the temperature and pressure differential energy as trying to return to the middle. Everything tries to return to the middle. And so anytime you can push it off the middle, it will try to return to the middle. And as it does, you can generate current. Curtis, some of the devices that I was shown at an embedded systems conference here in San Jose, they claim could work on 1/100th of 1 milliamp, which that boggles the mind. I didn't think that was possible. But they further said the way that they're now designing their circuitry is it can save states. So if the device runs out of power in the middle of processing something, it stays in that state until it gets enough power to continue. So it's not as if it has to reboot every time it runs out of power. Every time it gets power, it just continues the current operation. How do you see that changing the Internet of Things?
Well, the great thing is that you can now put sensors in places where you know they are likely to have periods of inactivity, and know that when they are able to be recharged, they'll be able to just pick up and start working again. You know, anytime you have to restart a system, there's always that bit of question about whether or not it's going to come back to life. I mean, this is why we do the post test every time we boot a computer, just to make sure that it's coming back alive. The fewer times you have to do that, the happier everyone is. I think where we're going to see this is in a lot of embedded locations where it's difficult to get in and replace sensors. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more remote process control. You know, as we've been talking about this, I've been thinking about someone that I talked to a number of years ago. They did instrumentation for the inside of underground gas tanks. And when you talk about low energy, for them, it wasn't so much low energy consumption on the devices, but making sure that any energy they used, and I've always remembered the calculation, was less than 1/2 the combustion energy required for an ideal gas vapor air mixture. So they were limiting current to avoid blowing these giant tanks out of the ground. The same technology is being used in all these other devices that we're now talking about, but for different reasons. It's interesting to see all of the process control wrapping around, because you have things like the oil and gas and chemical industry requirements now being used for power conservation, now being used for device longevity. And I think this is one of many areas where, now that the devices are available, we're going to see greater efficiency and tremendous effectiveness, because we're going to be able to sense and control processes that we've never been able to look at before. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely exciting times. We've got Dr. Morbius in the chat room and Chumley, who are actually discussing some of the engineering behind this. It's great. I love this kind of discussion. And Dr. Morbius wanted to know, well, don't you need at least some power to maintain the state? But that was the interesting thing about the circuit that they showed me. It used, much like Intel's new technology, memory storage technology, it wasn't a capacitor, it was phase change. And so phase change requires no additional power. You only need power when you change the phase. So if you lose power, when it does get power back, it just picks off from where it stopped. All of those phase changes will remain for, I mean, it's something like 1,000 years. It's a ridiculous amount of time, because, again, you're not using a capacitor. But Cheebert, there is something interesting that's happening now, because we've been calling it the Internet of Things since episode 3 of This Week in Enterprise Tech, when we had Electric Imp on the show, and they were showing us their device that used Wi-Fi to create an Internet of Things device. And it sounded cool, and it sounded interesting. It was something like, yeah, we could see the promise in this technology. It's exactly what Curtis is talking about, this idea of putting sensors everywhere to look at things that you would never be able to look at. But I think what we're starting to see now is that what we thought of as the Internet of Things actually wasn't. It was a very early hokey attempt. It was taking devices that were low-powered computers and using them like an Internet of Things. The new generation of Internet Things devices could never be a Raspberry Pi. It could never be an Arduino. These are devices that are specifically designed not to do general computing or even embedded computing. They're specifically designed to do Internet of Things computing, which we're now starting to see different, right? I mean, this differentiation is something we're going to have to get used to. It's no longer an Internet of Things device. It's just a low-powered computer. It's now an Internet of Things device is a device that could only be used on the Internet of Things.
Well, the Internet of Things is one of those technologies that is going to be a moving target for the foreseeable future. You know, the Electric Imp is great. You know, I'm actually planning on using it for a 300-level environmental monitoring class in the fall. But there's all kinds of new things. WIO is now on Kickstarter. And what they've done is, this thing is a very specific sensor platform. It uses the Grove technology plug, and it allows you to plug in all kinds of sensors and have a link up to a cloud app. Now, the definition I work from isn't so much what kind of computing platform, but what you're doing with it. An Internet of Thing, in my mind, is sensors extending the human reach without having a human present, and doing it hopefully in a secure manner so that you can correlate this data across multiple locations, multiple people, and so forth. There's a lot of really neat things happening. My Bloom Sky is a really good example. Their APIs are supposed to be out in the new year, and we're actually going to take a good hard look at using Bloom Skies all over the island of Molokai to tell the utility when a neighborhood full of PV is going to get shaded, and that way they can predict what kind of energy to move around on the island of Molokai.
Oh, every once in a while, I'm just really grateful that I'm born in this time, because there's some really cool tech that's coming out. Gentlemen, you know what? We're going to call it because we are heading into the next show here on the Twit TV network, and I don't want to inconvenience that host, because that host is me. But I want to thank you for being part of this episode. This was just a fun sort of end of the year type of episode, which is just the three of us. I really, really treasure these. Now, we've got some interesting stuff coming up. Next week, Cheebert, I think we're doing our holiday gift-giving episode, are we not?
That was my plan.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about the things that we would like to receive in our gift baskets. I know that Cheebert and I already have a couple of items on our wish list. Curtis, I think Cheebert and I are both taking kind of the impractical route. Are you going to take the more practical route for products?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to try to have a little fun with it, but practicality may sneak in there a little bit. That's just who I am.
Well,
yeah, I see, and I'm kind of leaning towards what kinds of things would you spend your year-end money on that you wouldn't necessarily buy under normal circumstances. Some of the fun stuff, some of the things that you might want to stick into your toolkit. I always have to have this little list, and just in case there's year-end money, I need to be able to spend it at a moment's notice, and that's kind of what I'm doing with my list.
Hey, Brian, what are we doing with our year-end money? Brian Burnett.
We're going to buy more quadcopters, right?
Or steam buns. Quadcopters or steam buns.
Yeah, depending on how much we have left over, I guess.
Absolutely. And then the week after that, I think we have one more regular episode, and then we are pre-recording our predictions episode. We're going to be taking back the predictions we made from last year. We're going to sort of summarize the year, and then we're going to make our predictions for 2016. So, folks, we are getting closer to the end of 2015. I do want to thank you for another fun year of This Week in Enterprise Tech. There's going to be plenty more thanks to go around as we go, but I can't say it often enough. I really appreciate the fact that you let us geek out with the tech that we enjoy. Gentlemen, I'm afraid that our audience has done it again. They've used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise show in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 phase change materials. Again, I want to thank you both for being on. You are the heart and the soul of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Cheebert, could you tell us what you're going to be up to over the next 2 weeks?
Well, I am designing, or trying to finish designing, a control system using an Extron controller for the Department of Emergency Management. And I'm going to be hiding in the cloisters in San Francisco and trying to finish the last couple chapters of my book.
All right, and I'm going to be coming down to your room as often as possible to disrupt you from finishing the last few chapters of your book. I've got that big box of bacon, so there you go.
Oh, bacon.
Oh, Curtis, why aren't you coming to San Francisco? Cheebert's going to be here. We got 2 guest rooms. We could have you right across from each other. You could collaborate on the book.
We could indeed, and I would love doing that. But unfortunately, in a week or so, I've got to run up to New York for a few days. We're having a big confab of all of the editors and staffers for my day job. So I get to go and enjoy the sights of New York City for the holiday.
Well, gentlemen, again, thank you so very much. It is always a pleasure. It's always so much fun. And I love it when I get to see you each and every single week. So to you, I salute. I also want to thank everyone here who makes this show possible. We couldn't do the show without Carson Bonney, our super producer, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Hawaiian Reindeer. We couldn't do it without Lisa and Leo, who let us do This Week in Enterprise Tech. And of course, my TD, Cranky Hippo, Mr. Brian Burnett. Brian, when you're not accidentally looping videos for This Week in Enterprise Tech, what do you do on the Twit TV network?
You know, now that you've mentioned that, we're just going to have to leave it in the episode. So I'm going to tell Kevin not to edit that out.
There you go.
When I'm not doing this, I work on Know How with you. We have a lot of fun doing that show. We record that every Thursday. I'm not sure. Are we doing any holidays special stuff?
I think
or we
so.
just give up?
No, I think we're going to do
questions?
that. Yeah.
Okay. And when I'm not doing that, I TD the Screensavers, which you're occasionally on, and that's on Saturdays. So another fun show to check out if you haven't already.
And I should mention that Brian is being very brave to be in the studio because he currently has the plague, and you can't hear him because he was nice enough to mute his microphone, but he is coughing up a storm. And we now have to disinfect the TriCaster. Thank you.
That's why we have all this hand sanitizer. All over the place.
Folks, don't forget that you can find our show on our show page at twit.tv/Twiet. If you go there, not only will you be able to download our back episodes, but you'll also find links so you can subscribe. Get your Twiet goodness into your device of choice each and every single week automatically. Also, don't forget we do this show every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you go to live.twit.tv, you can watch us live, and you jump in at irc.twit.tv for our chat room so you can actually speak to us during the show. It's a great way to interact. Finally, I want to thank everyone who's out there because as we approach this holiday season, I am so thankful that you continue to watch so we can continue to bring you the Enterprise goodness. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.